Imagine a world where Rome, the most powerful city in antiquity, was reduced to ashes, where the great senators, the feared generals, and even Caesar himself were fleeing in despair, while an army of former slaves marched through the streets, free, vengeful, and unstoppable. But what if I told you that this almost happened? Spartacus, a simple gladiator, gathered thousands of men and challenged the greatest empire on earth. He won battle after battle, humiliated Roman generals, and came one step closer to changing history forever. Now imagine if he had succeeded. What would have happened to Rome? To the world? To our own history? Get ready, because what you are about to hear may make you see the past and the present in a completely different way. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take advantage now to be part of our community. Every interaction you make makes this space more special. The story of Spartacus is one of the most fascinating episodes of antiquity, not only because of its dramatic dimension, but also because of what it represents: a direct challenge to the power of Rome, the greatest power of its time. Between 73 and 71 BC, Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, led a slave revolt that shook the foundations of the Roman Empire. Although his rebellion was defeated, it left an indelible mark on history. But what would have happened if he had won? What would the world be like if Rome had been overthrown by slaves? This video proposes a detailed analysis of this hypothetical scenario, examining the political, social, and cultural implications of a Spartacus victory. Spartacus was born in Thrace, a region that is now part of Bulgaria. Captured and sold into slavery, he was trained as a gladiator at the school of Lentulus Batiatus in Capua. The life of a gladiator was marked by extreme violence and humiliation. They were forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of the Roman elite, in spectacles that celebrated Rome's dominance and power. However, Spartacus was not resigned to this fate. In 73 BC, he and about 70 other gladiators staged a daring escape, sparking a revolt that quickly spread throughout Italy. Spartacus's initial success was due in large part to his skill as a strategist and leader. Not only did he manage to unite slaves from diverse backgrounds, Thracians, Gauls, Germans, and others, but he also transformed a ragtag group into an effective military force. His army, initially consisting of a few hundred men, grew to include tens of thousands of slaves, many of whom were farm laborers exploited on the vast Roman estates. The revolt grew to alarming proportions, especially since Rome initially underestimated the threat. The Roman legions, considered invincible, were repeatedly defeated by Spartacus's innovative tactics. He avoided direct confrontation whenever possible, preferring ambushes and rapid movements that exploited the mobility of his troops. On one occasion, his army defeated 2 Roman legions at the Battle of Mount Vesuvius, an achievement that shocked the Roman elite and exposed the vulnerability of the empire. Spartacus's revolt was not just a fight for freedom. It was a direct challenge to the slave system that underpinned the Roman economy and society. However, the revolt was eventually crushed. In 71 BC, General Marcus Licinius Crassus surrounded Spartacus's army in the region of Lucania. After a decisive battle, Spartacus was killed, and his followers were crucified along the Appian Way, a brutal display of Roman power. The revolt failed, but its memory lives on, inspiring future generations to question oppression and injustice. Now imagine an alternative scenario. What if Spartacus had won? What would the world be like if he had succeeded in defeating Rome? A Spartan victory could have led to the creation of a new state in Italy, ruled by former slaves. This would have triggered a series of profound changes, from the early abolition of slavery to the reconfiguration of political power in the region. However, it could also have provoked a violent reaction from the Roman elites, leading to a period of instability and conflict. This is just the beginning of our analysis. In the next section, we will examine how Spartacus could have established a slave kingdom in Italy, exploring the political and social challenges he would have faced. What would be the implications of a government led by former slaves? How would Rome react to this new reality? These are questions that lead us to reflect on the limits of power and the possibilities of history. Have you found this interesting so far? Leave a like to let me know you like this type of content. What if Spartacus, after defeating Rome, had established a slave kingdom in the heart of Italy? Imagine a scenario where former slaves, once oppressed, took control of one of the most powerful regions of the ancient world. What would it be like to rule a territory marked by centuries of Roman domination? What would be the challenges of building a new society from the ashes of an empire? This is the scenario we will analyze, a world where Spartacus not only won, but also attempted to create a new political and social order. The first question that arises is, how would Spartacus have consolidated his power after a victory over Rome? The fall of the Eternal City would not have meant the end of resistance. The Roman Senate, even weakened, would still have the support of loyal provinces and local elites, who would not have easily accepted a government led by former slaves. Furthermore, the very nature of Spartacus's revolt, a coalition of slaves from different backgrounds and cultures, would have presented significant challenges. Maintaining unity among Thracians, Gauls, Germans, and other groups would have been a Herculean task, especially in the context of social and political reconstruction. One of Spartacus's first steps would have been to establish a capital for his new kingdom. Capua, the city where his revolt began, could have been a symbolic choice. However, Rome, with its advanced infrastructure and strategic location, would have been a more viable option. Imagine the historical irony. The city that once symbolized Rome's absolute power was now ruled by those who had been its slaves. But occupying Rome would not have been enough. Spartacus would need to implement profound reforms to ensure the stability of his government. One of the first measures would be the total abolition of slavery. In a world where slavery was the basis of the economy, this decision would have enormous implications. Large rural estates, known as latifundia, depended on slave labor to function. Without this labor, agricultural production would collapse, leading to economic crises and food shortages. Spartacus would have to find a solution to this problem, possibly by redistributing land and encouraging free labor. However, this would generate conflicts with the former owners, who would not accept losing their lands without resistance. Another challenge would be the political organization of the new kingdom. Spartacus, accustomed to leading an army, would have to adapt his skills to governing a state. He could opt for a more collective system of government, involving representatives of different groups in a council. However, the lack of political experience among his followers could lead to internal disputes and instability. Furthermore, the creation of a standing army would be essential to defend the kingdom against possible Roman counterattacks or invasions by neighboring peoples. Religion and culture would also be areas of great transformation. Rome had a rich religious tradition, with gods such as Jupiter, Mars, and Vesta occupying a central place in public life. Spartacus, on the other hand, would probably promote a mixture of beliefs brought by his followers from different backgrounds. This could lead to the emergence of a new cultural identity, but also to conflicts between groups with different traditions. What about international relations? A slave kingdom in Italy would be viewed with suspicion by neighboring powers. Carthage, for example, might see an opportunity to take revenge on Rome, but would also fear the rise of a new power on its border. Likewise, Germanic and Celtic tribes might ally themselves with Spartacus, but could also pose a threat if they decided to invade the new kingdom. Now imagine the legacy of a slave kingdom. If Spartacus had succeeded in establishing a stable government, he might have inspired other revolts throughout the ancient world. Slavery, a seemingly immutable institution, might have been challenged centuries earlier than it was. However, it is also possible that the new kingdom would have succumbed to internal and external pressures, leading to a period of chaos and fragmentation. This scenario leads us to a profound reflection. What does it take to build a new society from the ruins of an old order? What are the limits of resistance and the possibilities of social transformation? And how might Spartacus's legacy have shaped the modern world? In the next section, we will imagine an alternative. What if Spartacus had chosen not to rule Italy, but instead to lead a great escape north across the Alps? How would that decision have affected the course of history? The answer could completely change our understanding of the impact of Spartacus's revolt. What if Spartacus, instead of trying to rule Italy, had led a great escape north, crossing the Alps and leaving Rome behind? Imagine a scenario in which he and his slave army not only escaped Roman oppression, but also found refuge among Celtic and Germanic tribes, posing a constant threat to the empire's borders. How would this decision have changed the course of history? What would have been the implications of a Spartacus alive, free, and uniting barbarian peoples against Rome? This is the scenario we will explore. A world in which Spartacus's revolt did not end with his death, but instead grew into a resistance movement that echoed for centuries. The idea of a flight north was not foreign to Spartacus. During the revolt, he considered crossing the Alps to escape the Roman siege and find freedom beyond the borders of Italy. However, this decision was abandoned, and he was ultimately defeated. But what if he had followed through? Imagine the slave army, made up of thousands of men, women, and children, marching toward the Alps. The journey would be arduous, with climatic, geographical, and logistical challenges. However, Spartacus's determination and the promise of freedom could have been enough motivation to overcome these obstacles. By crossing the Alps, Spartacus and his followers would enter territories inhabited by Celtic and Germanic tribes. These peoples, although culturally different from the Roman slaves, shared a common enemy: Rome. The possibility of an alliance between Spartacus and these tribes would be real. He could offer his military and tactical expertise, while the Celts and Germans would provide resources, shelter, and knowledge of the terrain. Together, they could form a powerful coalition capable of challenging Rome on its own borders. One of the first impacts of such an alliance would be to increase pressure on the Roman provinces in northern Italy. Tribes that had previously acted in isolation would now have an experienced leader and an organized army. This could lead to a series of coordinated attacks on Roman cities, fortresses, and trade routes. The empire's economy, already dependent on the wealth of its provinces, would suffer a significant blow. Furthermore, Spartacus's presence in the border regions would force Rome to divert precious resources to defend its borders, weakening its ability to maintain control over other areas. But the flight north would not only be a military strategy, it would also have profound social and cultural implications. Spartacus and his followers, by mingling with Celtic and Germanic tribes, would create a new cultural identity. Imagine a society where Roman, Thracian, Gallic, and Germanic traditions merged, giving rise to a unique culture. This blending could result in technological, artistic, and philosophical advances that would influence the development of Europe for centuries to come. However, the alliance between Spartacus and the barbarian tribes would also face challenges. Cultural, linguistic, and leadership differences could lead to internal conflicts. Furthermore, Rome would not stand idly by in the face of such a looming threat. The empire could launch military campaigns to eliminate Spartacus and his allies, or attempt to split the coalition through diplomacy and bribery. The survival of the movement would depend on Spartacus's ability to maintain unity and discipline among his followers. What about the legacy of a successful escape? If Spartacus had crossed the Alps and established a new base of resistance, he could have become a symbol of freedom and resistance for other oppressed peoples. His story would have inspired revolts in other parts of the empire, creating a network of resistance that challenged Rome on multiple fronts. However, it is also possible that, over time, the movement would have lost momentum, diluted by internal and external pressures. Now imagine the long-term impact of a flight north. How would Spartacus' presence in the barbarian regions have influenced the development of Europe? And how would Rome have responded to such a persistent threat on its borders? These questions lead us to reflect on the limits of imperial power and the possibilities of resistance. What if Spartacus had marched on Rome and succeeded in taking the city that was the heart of the empire? Imagine a scenario in which rebellious slaves, led by a gladiator, invaded the streets of the Roman capital, toppling statues of emperors and occupying the Senate. What would the world be like if the eternal city, the ultimate symbol of Rome's power and glory, fell into the hands of those who had once been its slaves? This is the scenario we are going to explore. A world where Spartacus not only defeated the Roman legions, but also conquered Rome itself, setting off a series of events that would change the course of history. The idea of Spartacus invading Rome may seem unlikely, but it is not impossible. During the revolt, he demonstrated an impressive skill for strategy and tactics, defeating Roman legions on several occasions. Had he been able to gather enough forces and take advantage of Rome's initial disorganization, an invasion of the capital could have been feasible. Imagine the slave army, made up of thousands of men marching towards Rome while the city was in panic. The Roman elites, accustomed to luxury and security, would be confronted with a brutal reality. The power of the empire was not invincible. The siege of Rome would be a dramatic event. The city, surrounded by imposing walls, had strong defenses, but it was also vulnerable to attacks from within. Many slaves and commoners lived in precarious conditions within Rome, and it is possible that they would join Spartacus, opening the city gates or causing internal unrest. Imagine the chaos in the streets of Rome, with fires, looting, and fighting on every corner. The Senate, the symbol of political power, would be taken, and the once powerful senators would be forced to flee or face the wrath of the rioters. The fall of Rome to Spartacus would have immediate and long-term implications. In the short term, the city would be sacked, and much of the wealth accumulated by the empire would be redistributed among the slaves. However, maintaining control over Rome would be a monumental challenge. The city was the political, economic, and cultural center of the empire, and its fall would trigger chaos throughout the provinces. The Roman elites, even in flight, would not accept the loss of their power passively. They would organize resistance, seeking support from other cities and provinces in order to retake the capital. In addition, the fall of Rome would have a profound psychological impact. The city was seen as invincible, the heart of an empire that dominated the known world. Its fall into the hands of slaves would be a devastating blow to Roman morale, but also a sign of hope for other oppressed peoples. Revolts would break out in every province, from Gaul to North Africa, creating a widespread crisis that would threaten the very existence of the empire. However, governing Rome would be an even greater challenge than conquering it. Spartacus, accustomed to leading an army, would have to adapt his skills to manage a complex and multifaceted city. He would need to establish a new political system, redistribute land and wealth, and ensure the safety of his followers. In addition, there would be constant internal resistance, with rival factions seeking to regain power. The stability of Rome would depend on Spartacus's ability to unite different groups and maintain order amidst the chaos. What about the legacy of a slave-ruled Rome? Had Spartacus been able to maintain control of the city, he could have ushered in a new era in ancient history, marked by the abolition of slavery and the rise of a new social order. However, It is also possible that the fall of Rome would have led to a period of fragmentation and conflict, with different groups vying for power in a vacuum left by the collapse of the empire. Now imagine the long-term impact of a slave-ruled Rome. How would the history of Europe and the world have been different without the legacy of the Roman Empire? And how would the very concept of power and authority have been redefined? These questions lead us to reflect on the limits of resistance and the possibilities of social transformation. What if Spartacus's victory had been the trigger for a wave of revolts that shook the foundations of the Roman slave system? Imagine a world where the rebellion of a single man inspired thousands of slaves to rise up against their oppressors, triggering a crisis that would bring the Roman Empire to its knees. How would history have been different if slavery, a seemingly indestructible institution, had been eradicated centuries earlier? This is the scenario we will explore. A world where Spartacus' victory not only brought down Rome, but also transformed the very nature of ancient society. Slavery was the backbone of the Roman economy. From the vast estates to the mines and construction sites, slaves were the lifeblood that kept the empire running. They were treated as commodities, stripped of rights, and subjected to inhumane conditions. Spartacus's revolt was a rare moment when this order was challenged, but what if it had merely been the beginning of a global revolution? A Spartacus victory could have inspired revolts across the Roman provinces. In Sicily, where slave rebellions had occurred in the past, rural workers could rise up again. In Gaul and Hispania, slaves and oppressed local peoples could unite to challenge Roman rule. Even in the heart of the empire, in Italy itself, news of Rome's fall to slaves could have sparked a wave of insurrection. The result would have been a widespread crisis, with the slave system collapsing and the Roman economy facing unprecedented collapse. However, Rome's response to this crisis could also have been brutal. The empire, known for its ability to adapt and survive, could have responded with even more violent repression. Mass executions, crucifixions, and torture could have become even more common in a desperate attempt to maintain control. Roman laws, already harsh, could have become even more repressive, with exemplary punishments for any sign of insubordination. Slavery, far from being abolished, could have become even more cruel and inhumane. But what if, instead of violent repression, Spartacus's victory had led to a gradual reform of the slave system? Imagine a scenario where Rome, faced with the threat of widespread revolts, decided to abolish slavery and adopt a system of free labor. This change would have profound implications, not only for the economy, but also for the social structure of the empire. The latifundia, which depended on slave labor, would have to be reformed, with workers receiving wages and rights. Roman society, previously divided between masters and slaves, would have to reinvent itself, creating new forms of organization and cooperation. The cultural impact of this transformation would also be significant. Slavery was not just an economic institution. It was deeply rooted in Roman culture and mentality. The idea that some people were inherently inferior and destined for servitude was widely accepted. The abolition of slavery would force a rethinking of these values, leading to a new understanding of human dignity and individual rights. This change could have influenced the development of philosophical and political thought, anticipating ideas that would only emerge centuries later. However, the abolition of slavery would also bring challenges. The Roman economy, dependent on slave labor, would face a difficult period of adjustment. Productivity might initially decline, leading to shortages of food and other resources. The Roman elites, who would lose their source of wealth and power, would fiercely resist these changes. The transition to a free society would be marked by conflict and tension, with the risk of political and social destabilization. Now imagine the legacy of a world where slavery had been abolished centuries earlier. How would the history of Europe and the world have been different? The Industrial Revolution, for example, might have occurred earlier, driven by a free and motivated workforce. The ideas of freedom and equality, which would only gain traction in the Enlightenment, might have emerged much earlier, shaping the development of modern societies in radically different ways. But this transformation also leads us to a profound reflection. What is the true cost of freedom? And to what extent is a society willing to change in order to guarantee the dignity and rights of all its members? These questions invite us to think not only about the past, but also about the present and the future. So, did you enjoy imagining a world where Spartacus, the gladiator who became a symbol of freedom, defeated Rome and changed the course of history? It was quite a journey, wasn't it? We saw everything from how he could have created a slave kingdom in Italy to what would have happened if he had invaded Rome and taken the city. We also thought about the impact this would have had on slavery and how the world could be completely different today. But what does all this mean after all? The story of Spartacus shows us that a single person with courage and determination can challenge even the largest empire in the world. He wasn't a powerful general or an influential politician. He was just a guy who decided he would no longer accept being treated like an object. And that made all the difference. If he had won, perhaps slavery would have ended much earlier, and the idea of freedom and equality would have emerged centuries before we know it. But we also saw that changing the world is not easy. Even if Spartacus had defeated Rome, he would still have had to deal with a lot of challenges. How to govern a giant city like Rome, how to maintain unity among people from different cultures, and how to deal with the resistance of the Roman elites. Victory would only be the beginning of a long battle. So, what do you think? Would Spartacus have managed to create a better world? Or would everything have descended into chaos? And most importantly, what can his story teach us about today's world? The fight for justice and freedom still exists, and each of us can make a difference, whether by facing great empires or simply helping those around us. So, here's an invitation. Keep thinking about these questions. History is not just a thing of the past. It helps us understand the present and imagine the future. And if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more time travel and reflections on what could have been. After all, history is made of choices, and each one of them can change everything. So, are you ready for the next adventure? Because we still have a lot of amazing things to discover together. See you then!